Well, hello to you all there. Thank you for participating in this webinar, the Then, Now and Next, the IRN Research Industry Report interview with David Mort. David, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Look, it's a fantastic opportunity for us to discuss the two reports that your firm has released. But before we do that, I'll just cover off a couple of things in terms of housekeeping and what we're going to cover over the course of today. So my name's Dave Newick. I'm the Managing Director of Arken.legal. So for those of you that haven't been in a webinar with Arken.legal before or with me, a very warm welcome to you. Arken.legal is a document automation and business efficiency specialist in the estate planning sector, and we've been around for more than 28 years. Now, the webinar today, you can see that there's a panel up to the right-hand side, and that gives you the opportunity to ask questions and things and engage with us. There won't be any polls. We're going to try and cram quite a bit into a shorter period of time, because the research that IRN Research and David has done is pretty comprehensive, and there's a lot that we would like to present to you, but of course we can't present it all. So basically the run sheet of this today is that we're going to be having a chat. So that's David and I talking through. I'm going to be asking some questions, and David's going to be giving his insights in and around the two reports that IRN Research has recently published. Now, if you're interested in the reports, then there is an opportunity at the end of the webinar to get David's contact details, or you can visit the IRN Research website to purchase the report. And as I say, there's certainly a lot that you can cover, and I would thoroughly recommend that you do consider looking at the reports. Now, David, can you tell us a little bit about the reports?
Sure. For those who don't know us, IRN Research has been around since 1991, and we've been working in the legal sector since the late 90s. Our main activity still is commission research for law firms, legal providers, suppliers to the sector. But we publish various reports on a number of practice areas, and the two we're talking about today are the Wills Probate Market Report, which is essentially a supply side report, and the other one is the UK Wills and Probate Consumer Research Report, which, as its name suggests, is based on a large national sample of UK consumers who have taken out a will or are considering taking out a will. Both reports have been running since about 2012. I think that was the first year. So we've got a lot of trend data as well over quite a long period. That's about it, I think.
Yeah, look, there's very much looking forward to sharing this with the participants today. You've certainly got the background and the fact that there's been different reports over different years, and you're starting to see some trends, I think is really, really valuable. Well, look, let's start, shall we? So the part one of the webinar is around the market report. So in that report, David, what are the main findings?
Okay, I'm going to pick out 5 key findings just to cover very briefly, starting with a regular survey of firms in this sector that we run, and it's a survey of around about 150 to 180 law firms, will writers, others who are involved in the will writing market, and we estimate market value growth based on their responses has been around 5% in 2019, very similar to the growth in 2018, with probate work the main driver of that growth. That's the first thing, I suppose. Second thing is, despite the arrival of a number of new entrants into the market in recent years, we still see that the majority of will writing and probate work is carried out by law firms and solicitors. I'll come back with some figures on that a little bit later. I think what has changed in the sector is some changes structurally. So, for example, the leading volume players have increased their market share. Startup companies with innovative IT solutions are creating some market disruption. New players, especially in probate and estate administration, have entered the market, and you'll know some of these, I'm sure: accountants, conveyancers, legal execs,
yes,
all now licensed to provide probate. And of course, we've got the new online portal from HM Courts and Tribunal Service. Thirdly, again, we know about price competitiveness in the market. A lot of fixed fees now for simple wills, but we've seen definitely a move towards much more fixed fee models in probate as well. Again, I'll come back to that a little bit. More providers are starting to offer related services alongside just will writing, things like LPAs, funeral planning, care plans, and so on. And finally, we ask practitioners in our survey about their workloads and how they anticipate their workloads developing over the next 12 months. And many will writers this year are now much more optimistic than they've been since the survey began. We have around 3/4 expecting increased workloads in the next 12 months. And that's the highest it's been since we started that particular survey 4 years ago. I think that's the key findings, I think.
Well, the 5 pretty significant findings too, aren't they, David? And you know, I'm interested. We agreed off air, didn't we, that we weren't going to talk about the C word, and I don't think we should. But when you look at that last statement in and around the optimism, this is obviously all based on the data collected from 2019, and that may well change considering where the market is potentially heading, and that doesn't necessarily mean to say that it could change negatively or positively. Or rather, it won't be. Let's not take a negative sentiment from that, is what I'm saying. It could well be a positive change. Yes.
It could be. Once it's over, whenever that is, there may well be individuals who reflect on what's happened and think, well, I need to think about financial planning and other things in a much more kind of long-term way. So who knows? Yeah, you might be right. It might well have a positive effect.
I was interested to see that the number of lasting powers of attorney has risen substantially to 812,000 from 300,000 in 2013. What do you think the main drivers of that are?
Yeah, it's a big increase in just a few years, and I think the reasons are primarily the changing demographics, the money and property owned by older adults, and some worries over healthcare. The UK population over 65 is increasing at a faster rate than the UK population as a whole. People are living longer, and age-related diseases like dementia are becoming more common. So there's also, I think, more forward planning with people getting ready if they have to go into care or need someone they can trust to deal with the finances and assets. And more will writers are encouraging people to at least think about taking out something like an LPA. And there is more awareness of LPAs, whether financial or health related. The only thing I'd say about the figures, and they have increased dramatically, is that there were big annual increases between 2013 and 2017 as awareness of these care issues and financial issues spread. Increases in the last 2 years have been much smaller and have been closer to the general increase in the 65s and over population. So it's still increasing, but not at the same rate as it was a few years ago.
Not at the same rate. You haven't got those step changes that you saw in previous years. Yeah. What have you forecast as the volume for LPAs in 2021?
Given what I just said really about the kind of slowing down of the growth, we think that LPA numbers, and what I mean by that are the number of LPAs applied for in England and Wales, will increase by around 8%, maybe 10% in 2020 and 2021. So that would push them to around 890,000, for example, in this current year.
Okay, still pretty substantial numbers, aren't they? When we think that these are new documents each year. So, yeah. Now, I'm going to ask you a difficult question, David. Based on your research, how many wills do you think are written in the UK each year?
Yeah, I was dreading you asking this. I And it's a really difficult one to calculate. As you know, there are no regularly published stats on number of wills. And we, to be honest, as a research agency, we have been very wary of producing any published estimates. To be honest, because we just don't think that the calculations are robust enough. But having said all that, for the sake of this webinar, I'll try and give a couple of thoughts on that. Our consumer survey results, for example, do ask people when they made their will. So we have a figure of the number of adults that have made a will in the last 12 months, for example. And in 2019, it was 14% of adults who had a will. And that, incidentally, is the highest percentage it's been for a while.
Huh?
That, if you extrapolate that figure to the adult population and those that have a will, it would suggest that well over 1 million adults are making a will a year. And to be honest, I just think that's far too high. And I think that might include, for example, people who are rewriting their wills, redrafting them,
yes. Or
some consumers might just have forgotten when they made the will. So they said, yeah, we made it last year, but actually it was probably 2 years ago. So that figure, I think, is just too high. If you look at calculating a figure based on how many law firms and will writers there are in the market, and then make the assumption that most of those are small players who are dealing with a relatively small number of wills a year, and we have some figures on that from our surveys, and then add those to some of the volume players who obviously are dealing with thousands of wills a year, then our calculation is around 800,000 a year, maybe 900,000 a year.
Yes.
But please don't quote me on that. It's a really rough estimate, and I would be very interested to hear from anybody else who's tried to make that calculation and what figure they've come up with.
It is very difficult, isn't it? And I've had several conversations with different industry players around this, and we have all agreed that it's just impossible to tell, although perhaps with the digitization of the industry, that we will start to be able to see some more reliable data coming through. Now, you referenced the increasing market share of large operators in that synopsis. Why do you think that's starting to occur?
Oh, okay, well, maybe first I should explain what I mean by increased market share, because most of you, again, will know that this sector is highly fragmented, many small providers. And so far, none of the larger operators have built up a significant market share. But what I'm saying and what's coming out of the surveys is their combined market share is becoming noticeable for the first time. And I'm referring here particularly to leading firms such as Corporative Legal, Irwin Mitchell, Simpson Miller, Slater & Gordon, and Which Legal, those five in particular. 5 years ago, their volume share of the market each would have been about 2%, 3%. But this has now increased to around 4, maybe 5% each. So it's doubling, or it has doubled in the last 5 years. So it's a combined share now for those top 5 brands of still less than 20%, but something that is a noticeable increase from a few years ago.
Of course.
So that's what I mean by that. Why is it increased? I think there's some common reasons and some different ones. The co-op and Which have large membership bases, which they've tapped into. All have been pushing fixed fee services and moving into fixed fee probate services. Their marketing spend has increased, and they're increasing partnership deals. There are some specifics. Irwin Mitchell, for example, has been building up its contentious wills advice alongside its volume business. And I'm just trying to think, nearly all of them, I think, have been acquiring businesses, and that's been a feature, and I think that will continue. So there's a number of reasons, but it's still only growing relatively gradually, but it's definitely increasing.
Thank you. Some interesting stuff there. And look, I think from the last point you make around acquisition, that again, without mentioning the C word and dwelling on that, it may well be that there is some further acquisition, but it's unlikely, I think, that we'd see it at that volume player end of the market. It'll be more around the lower end of the market, by my estimation.
Yeah, I think they'll continue to look at smaller players. You're right, and try and pick 1 or 2 of those off. Yeah.
Now, with that profile of the large players, are there typical features of commonality between all of those sorts of practices?
Again, I think I mentioned some of these: more marketing spend, cross-selling definitely, more fixed fee options, and investment for most of them in improved IT systems. And the acquisitions one again, I think, is one that they will continue to look at. So I think they're the common themes, I think.
Great. Yeah, that stands to reason, doesn't it? Now, looking at pricing, have you seen any changes to what's been charged over the years?
Again, it's mainly fixed fees becoming more important for probate. I think there have been some slight changes in prices for wills. I know you're going to ask me the next question on that, so
Yes.
I'll come back to those in a sec.
Look, I think it's one of those questions, isn't it? The median price point of a will. I guess that's probably from a industry perspective a really important metric.
Yeah, we look at prices when we talk about median price points for the market survey. We're effectively looking at published prices from wills providers, and our 2019 survey of published prices, if you ignore the freebies and so on, found the median price for a single will from a law firm was about £150, a simple single will, and this has fallen from about £180 in 2017. The median price for a specialist will writer was about £131. That's not really changed much in the last few years. So they're based on published prices. And later on, we'll talk about what consumers actually paid, which is a little bit different.
Okay, great. Well, we'll spend some more time on that in the consumer section. Now, you also referenced the increasing emergence of digitization on the wills and probate sector. How's that manifested, and how have you seen this sort of trend in previous years?
In the context of the market report, I'm really talking there about the increased digitization of processes and investment in specialist will writing software or improved will writing software by the providers. And I think that started to gather pace in the last couple of years, partly because more software companies have introduced improved software, more software companies have entered the market, and companies like yourself have expanded their offerings. So I think you probably know as much about that as I do, Dave, to be honest.
Yeah, well, look, you're warming the cockles of my Kiwi heart here, David. Because we would like to think that that the messages of the value of digitization and technology may perhaps be starting to be heard, but I guess we shall see what changes occur over the next little while. But I'm kind of picking that changed business processes as a result of remote working are probably going to drive even further adoption, but we'll probably see what happens there. If we look at the historical trends overall, what changes are you starting to see emerge, and what's constant in that?
Okay, I'm only going to mention two changes. One I've mentioned already, because I don't want to kind of go through a long list. But I think one is definitely the probate fixed fees changes, where now far more probate is dealt with on a fixed fee basis. So that's one. The other thing I would mention, which I've touched on before, are that more providers are trying to offer more than just a will writing service, trying to add on LPAs, for example, or other services such as funeral planning, inheritance tax planning, care plans, and so on. I'll just refer to our latest consumer survey to give you a feel for that. In the results in the latest survey, 4 out of 10 respondents who had a will said that they had bought an additional service alongside that will, at least one additional service. They might have bought more than one. Now, that might not sound very many, but it is increasing year on year. So it's going up by a few percentage points every year. So they might have bought, they might have done an LPA, for example. Will storage is the biggest one, financial plan, or something like that. So it's clear that very slowly, more providers are starting to add additional services to their will writing services. Sorry, Dave, were you going to say something?
I was going to say that 40% seemed a high number to me, and that's quite encouraging, really.
Yeah, and it's gone up from certainly less than 30% 2 or 3 years ago. So it is increasing year on year, which is definitely an encouraging sign. I think the main constant is the largely unchanging profile of those with a will, i.e. older adults. But I know that there are now new providers in the market that are trying to change this and encourage increased will writing among younger adult age groups. Again, I'll come back to that later. I think that's an interesting one. Whether it's achievable or not, I think is a big question, but we'll come back to that.
Okay, fantastic. Now, if we turn our attention now to where we expect the industry to be in, say, 2023, based on the historical research, which trends do you expect to strengthen in the next 3 years?
Well, we're going to see the UK population continue to age, and that's a positive for those trying to sell will writing and related services. The aging population should also lead to an increase in the number of dementia cases. So there's an increasing demand for LPAs, which we've talked about. And I think that, again, that demand for additional services will grow, such as living wills, care plans, and so on. I think that's a particularly interesting growth area, I think, for the next few years. And again, to emphasize that, I just see the leading players starting to increase their market share. Although, having said that, I don't see any of them individually taking a significant slice of the market in the next few years, but I think it will be a gradual.
Yes, after you had seen them going from 2 to 3% to 4 to 6%, and so if that trend continues, of course, then they'll own a larger share of the market. So that makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, look, let's turn our attention now to the consumer survey. What insights can you outline to us about the age breakdown of consumers who've got a will and who don't have a will?
Yeah, and we touched on this already, and there have been various surveys of will ownership in the last few years, and they all have a similar percentage regarding will ownership, and it's typically between 35 and 40% of adults. Our annual surveys are around 35 to 38%. So, and the percentage is not changing that much, but I suppose we should remember that the population overall is increasing. So the actual numbers with a will are increasing slightly, although the percentage is not changing. To answer the question on ages, over 6 out of 10 of the over 55s have a will in our latest survey, but ownership levels slip really quickly in the next oldest age group. So just over a third of 45 to 50-year-olds have a will, and then it drops to around 30% in the 35 to 44 age group. So there is a clear concentration in the over 55s.
So what we're saying is that there's half in the 35 to 44 age group as opposed to the over 55s in terms of percentage level.
Yeah, it's less than half really in the 35 to 40. In the second age group down, it's actually less than half.
Yes,
it's just over a third.
Well, what are the buying patterns surrounding that data, David?
As I said early on, just over half use solicitors and law firms, and the next largest group used are specialist will writers by around 1 in 5. And these two providers account, in other words, for about 3/4. And this hasn't really changed in the last few years, despite the arrival of new players. The use of solicitors and law firms has slipped just a little bit in the last 2 years, but it's a marginal decrease. It's not changed that much. I would mention DIY wills there as well. Our figures suggest that about 12% of adults who had a will completed all the wills themselves. And again, this has not changed very much over the last few years, which is interesting. You might have expected, I think, an increase in DIY wills, but it's not. It doesn't seem to be happening to a large extent yet.
Interesting, isn't it? Because DIY wills under that categorization includes the will pack that you can purchase off Amazon and then ranges through to online wills, I would assume.
Yeah, and obviously with the emergence of some new online will providers in the market, that percentage might well change in the next few years. We'll see.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see, won't it? And again, without referring to the C word consistently, it may well be that that brings about the change. Now, I was interested to see the percentage of consumers who use the internet to find a provider. Can you share that finding and why you think that has occurred?
Yeah, it's pretty low in our surveys. Well, I think it's low compared to some of the other consumer legal markets like personal injury and conveyancing, for example. The internet is used in the latest survey, or was used, sorry, by about 12% of those looking to find a provider. And I think part of the reason for that is because the demographics of people who have a will is geared towards the older age groups. Many of those go back to a provider that they've used before for another legal matter. So I don't think it's something that doesn't crop up. They don't need to use the internet that much because they've already got a law firm or a solicitor that they've used before. The second method of finding a provider is recommendations from friends, colleagues, relatives. And these two account for the majority of the ways to find a provider. So again, I don't think, compared to some other areas, that there's necessarily a need to turn to the internet as much. Again, that could change. I think that might change if we see targeting, for example, of younger age groups to make a will. But at the moment, I think it's a reflection of the fact that many of the people who are making a will have actually got experience of using legal services and are going back to somebody they've used before.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Now, what is one of the 5 findings you outline in your report which are important to consumers when deciding on how to select a will writer?
Okay, well, we ask a question in the survey and they're giving a list of options as to how important particular factors are in using a will writing service. And they're asked to rank these options, and they include everything from experience of a solicitor to access to online service, well-known brand. There are all kinds of things. But consistently, the most important factor is the experience of the advisor, and this has not changed since we started the surveys. Not far behind that and linked to the experience, I think, is the expectation that it will be a good quality of service. Cost is important, and it's normally in the top 3 or 4. In the last survey, it was number 3. So it's important, but it's not by any means the most important factor. And the 4th factor is ease of writing a will. And again, given that we might be seeing more online services, and that could become more important or not, we'll see. So the top 3 factors in particular are the ones that not only have been top for the last few surveys, but they are also the factors that rank highest across virtually all the consumer legal services markets that we look at.
Of course, so they are consistent there.
Yeah.
I'm particularly interested to see that the ease of writing a will comes in at number 4, and as you've mentioned, the online wills and the emergence of new solutions and new players in that market will definitely have a part to play. But I think possibly for me, it's also about the customer experience, because I've spoken to some law firms and they've still got 30-page fact-find documents which are paper-based. And if we go back to the fact that people have not got a will and why don't they have a will, then perhaps that's seen as a barrier to making it easy to go and do things.
Yeah.
Now, looking at pricing, have you seen any changes to what's been charged over the years?
Okay, well, we ask the survey respondents to tell us how much it costs for their will. Some of them can't remember, some of them don't tell us, but of the ones that did, there has generally been a slight decrease in the average price paid for a will in the surveys over the last 3 years. But it's been actually quite a small decrease of around £10 per will. But of course, that, again, there is a range of answers which start at free, to less than £50 and go all the way up to thousands of pounds. So that is very much the average price paid across a range of prices. We need to make that clear.
Yes, of course. What is the median price point from the consumer survey?
Again, given all the kind of caveats I just mentioned, that it's a median price based on a wide range of prices. The median price is between £115 and £120.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. And then, of course, you've got that fact that 4 in 10 people also then go and purchase something else.
Yeah,
so therefore, the
absolutely.
average transaction value is,
Yeah, will be higher.
Are you starting to see those changes in the probate and estate administration price points? I think you mentioned that a little earlier on.
Yeah, definitely. This is the first year of the survey that we have seen a majority of survey respondents saying that they are paid for probate services with a fixed fee. The percentage for fixed fees has been increasing gradually year on year, but this is the first time that it's actually passed 50% of the survey, which I think is significant. It's quite interesting. And it's a reflection, obviously, of the fact that there are more fixed fee options out there now.
Of course, yeah, and I think that it may well keep going, David, and become the norm. And and the percentage that used to be applied is perhaps not going to be applied anymore. But I guess we'll see. What other thoughts do you have about changes in terms of pricing or buying behaviours from the consumer report?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the big question is what happens in terms of online wills and this point we've raised before about how easy it is to make a will and whether that's going to change, particularly with some of the new entrants into the market, and also whether that will encourage younger adult groups to think about making a will. I know one of the new providers has said that the wills that they are dealing with in their business, the average age of people making those wills has come down from what, if you like, the overall survey results are. So I think the average age in our surveys, if you worked out an average age, would be about 59, 60. But they're saying that their average age for the will writers they deal with is much lower than that. Now, that's quite interesting, and I think that, as I say, the development of online services and the marketing, I think, of more online services targeted at some younger adults, I think might start to see some changes there. I'm kind of a bit cautious about that because I think, when you get down to very young adults, the priorities are not going to change. I don't think they don't see writing as a major priority. I don't think that's going to change, certainly not in the short term, in the next couple of years. But it might start to impact on those kind of age groups just below the 55s and over that we talked about before.
Interesting, isn't it? It's I'm fascinated to see next year's report already, David, to see what changes have come about. It's going to be some very interesting reading. So if we put all of these findings together with the above increased utilisation of LPAs in the market, does the data suggest that one of the drivers may be the millennials who are wanting to manage their ageing parents' affairs?
Yes, again, I'd be cautious about that because I think what I've said already, I just think millennials, we can define that in different ways, but let's say we're talking about ages of around 35 to 40. Then the data we have doesn't suggest that there's going to be a big upsurge in interest in LPAs, for example, in this group, or will writing for that matter. It's more likely, I think, that the push from providers will be to try and increase will ownership in, say, the 40 to 54-year-old age group, where it's still quite small. And of course, the millennials of now will be there in 5 to 10 years' time. So longer term, I think that's where I think the growth in will ownership will be in particular. In terms of LPAs and things, well, maybe the C word will have an impact once it's all cleared and people will start to think a bit more in younger age groups about how they need to deal with their aging parents. But that's almost a debate for another day. But I think it's possible that might impact at some stage on that. I would just mention one final finding from the consumer research. When consumers without a will were asked why they had not made a will yet, by far the most popular answer from a range of options they were given is, I just haven't got round to it yet. And in the 45 to 54 age group, over 7 out of 10 adults gave this as an answer. It slips as you go down the age groups, suggesting that there is more of this group that could be encouraged to make a will if providers targeted this group. So I think, again, there are a number of findings from the survey that might suggest there is mileage in targeting the next age group down, if you like, from the over 55s, which I think is interesting.
Well, it is interesting, isn't it?
Sorry, yes. I should have said at the start that our consumer surveys are national surveys, representative samples used, and a typical survey would be between 1,200 consumers and 1,500 consumers, to give you a sense of how many people. Sorry, I forgot that.
And that's a fair mix of the different generations and different age groups.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. David, look, that has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for your time today. Now, for everybody in the webinar, just before you go, I'm going to give you some details on how you can get a hold of David to ask any questions that you may have. So stay tuned, and I'll make sure that you've got access to those details. Now, a couple of other things to mention to you. One of those is that on Friday, Arken.legal is running a business continuity webinar to help practitioners in the market with how they can carry on and be successful and meet the expected increase in demand for wills and estate planning services, despite everything that's happening. So I'd definitely suggest that you check that out. The details are all on the Arken.legal website. You can register there, and we'll be looking through some of the business processes that you can consider, and some of the solutions to how best to work in a remote fashion. And then, of course, giving you an outline of some of the digital tools and some of the business processes that we can assist you with in terms of working in a remote way and not having to be reliant on face-to-face contact. So that's all available there on the site. Now, just before we go to the sum up and the details of how to find David online, for those of you that have been in webinars with me before, you'll know that I always like to include a quote, and the quotes will always typically include a quote from Winston Churchill. And I figured that when you have a quote from Winston Churchill, you've really got to have a picture of a lion, because the two are fairly synonymous. So not strictly related to the IRN Research survey report, but I did think that these are very appropriate quotes for the times that we live in. And I just wanted to take this opportunity while I'm talking to you today to wish all of the participants, all of our clients, all of the very best to you, the best of health and the best of business to you and to your loved ones. It is certainly going to be a challenging time as we look ahead together. As I was saying to my team yesterday, that there's probably not been a time like this since the Second World War. And one of the defining things that came from the Second World War was that the British public was discovered to be made of very stern stuff. And as I said to my team, that sometimes challenges can very quickly strip away the veneer from people. And I have absolutely no doubt that for my team and for our clients and for everybody who is here today in the webinar, that if the veneer were to be stripped away, that what we will find is absolutely solid English oak, and that is the basis of us being successful in what is to come over the next few months. So please sing out to us if we can be of any assistance to you. We really are here to help. So jump on that webinar, as I've also mentioned, but if you just want some assistance and support and want to know how you can carry on doing business, then please pick up the phone, drop us an email. Very, very happy to assist you there. So just to give you the details here, so these are David's details. David, do you want to add anything before we close down?
Yeah, all I would say is that you can get details of the reports on the website, or you can just email me and I'll send you some details and maybe contents pages and things like that. And we'll give a discount. We're going to give a discount to anybody who's on the webinar who's interested in buying any of our reports. And again, I can, if you contact me, I'll give you details of that.
Oh, thank you. That is very kind of you. There you go, people. You heard it there from David Mort himself, that a discount is available. So thank you. That is very kind. Look, can I just add that I thoroughly recommend that you purchase a copy of the report. It is worth every penny. Now, for those of you who don't know who I am and would like to contact me, if you have any questions, then please feel free to do so. We are working remotely. I'm very surprised that you haven't heard any dogs barking or strange noises in the house, because that does happen, doesn't it? But look, if you can or would like to get in touch with me about anything, you can call us on that number. These numbers all still are operational. Now, I wish you all the best.
Yeah, sorry, Dave, I forgot to say, if anybody's got any questions, I know we haven't got time to do it now, please drop me a line or contact me and I'll try and answer them.
Oh, of course, David, absolutely, yes. In fact, I had forgotten to say that as well, and thank you for reminding me. That is brilliant. Thank you to you once again, David. It's been a really fascinating session, and thank you for the insights that you shared. I'm sure they'll be incredibly useful for the people who have attended the webinar and those that check the webinar out by a recording basis later.
Okay, thank you.
All right, goodbye everyone, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you later. Goodbye now.